Well, hello, good evening, and welcome to episode 44 of Humanity versus Insanity, the Crane Report. Now, we haven't had an episode of the show for a couple of weeks, but there was no way I was going to pass up on the opportunity to broadcast today in the immediate aftermath of events unfolding in Greece. So this show is going to be dedicated to what's unfolding in Greece and the prognosis of events from this point forward. And my guest tonight is certainly very outspoken on this issue and has some very interesting perspectives on the situation with Tsipras and Varoufakis. But before that, I just wanted to make an observation that for all those people who've been asking about the AV6 DVDs, all the pre-orders have now been shipped. So if you're watching this and you had ordered a set of AV6 DVDs and you haven't received them, then do please drop me an email or a text and we'll chase them up. So for everybody else, they are available. You can get them via the Alternative View website, alternativeview.co.uk, or via the UK Column website, ukcolumn.org. So that's enough of the AV stuff for the moment anyway. Now, my guest tonight has actually spoken at one AV event, at AV4, I believe, and also joined us on the financial terrorism tour with John Perkins. That will be almost, I think, 3 years ago now, where sadly everything that we discussed on that tour is now coming to pass. But who wants to listen to any analysts? Better to read The Sun and the Daily Mail and the mainstream media and get your updates from them. Of course, those who did follow what we were putting forward will have hopefully taken the appropriate precautions. So here's a clue to my guest tonight. This is, I think, William's first book. This is William Engdahl, A Century of War, which he wrote 11 years ago. This book was actually updated and republished in 2012. William first came to my attention actually with this book, Seeds of Destruction, when I was touring the country trying to raise awareness of the Codex Alimentarius agenda. And William had published this just a few months before I started the UK tour. Seeds of Destruction, the hidden agenda of genetic manipulation, and that's exactly what William spoke about at AV4, and there's a screenshot you won't have seen William for a while probably. There you are, sitting on the platform at AV4. But William is an economist, but he's also an outstanding geopolitical analyst. And this was a seminal book, 2009, Full Spectrum Dominance. So for all those who weren't familiar with the documents published by the right-wing think tank, the Project for a New American Century, then this is an absolutely superb book and one I would highly recommend. Then William's enlightenment on the myth of peak oil manifested in this tome, Myths, Lies and Oil Wars. And sadly, of course, there are still a lot of people who do believe that oil and gas are fossil fuels. But the reality is somewhat different, as the Russians have known for a long time. In fact, over 5,000 academic papers have been written in Russian academia on the subject of abiotic oils. And in fact, the whole philosophy impacts upon their exploration and production techniques. Now, William's latest book is Target China, How Washington and Wall Street Plan to Cage the Asian Dragon. Well, we're going to be talking tonight about the gods of money. And this was a book that William published in 2010 and featured in his presentations during the financial terrorism tour. In fact, William, I realized earlier today that I don't think the financial terrorism presentations are actually up on the Alternative View YouTube channel. So that's something that we're going to rectify. But William, thanks very much for joining me this evening.
Good to see you again, Ian.
I have to say, sir, you're looking extremely well. And the beard, yes, very, very becoming.
Thank you.
So, William, you have been following the events in Greece very closely, and you certainly have a a somewhat different take than many within the alternative community, because the alternative community have been sort of waxing lyrical about this strategy that has been developed by Varoufakis and supported by Tsipras. But although the media, of course, today are full of the headlines: meltdown, Greeks vote no, Europe shudders, decisive no vote sets Greece on course for Euro exit. But you have a perception that it may not be as people perceive it to be.
I think something, as I said in the title of my article, something stinks about Varoufakis and the whole Greek mess. And if you look very carefully at what the party did when they were elected in this coalition in January, they were elected on an understandably popular campaign platform: no more austerity. And Greece is the first modern industrial OECD country since the 1930s that has been put through a depression as severe as that in the United States in the Great Depression of the 30s. And they have been put through that by the Troika. That is the IMF, the European Central Bank, this unelected financial dictatorship over the EU, or over a large chunk of it, and of course the European Union itself. And the Troika, each member of the Troika has a different agenda. The European Commission or the European Union wants to make sure that no country dares anything like a protest against too extreme austerity if they get into a crisis. The creditor banks, Deutsche Bank, Paribas in Paris, and HSBC in London, and the usual suspects in Wall Street, they want to set the precedent that countries that get into a mess like Greece, the banks will always be bailed out. Now, they've done that very successfully in the UK in the 08 period and afterwards, and also in the US after the September Lehman Brothers collapse. The plug was pulled on by Paulson. So they have their interest in this. The European Commission and the circles behind that commission, probably one of the most corrupt bodies on the face of the earth. It's a neck and neck with the U.S. Congress, and the White House, but I think they're right up there and tied for number one. Is the European Commission, and they want taxing powers and fiscal powers over all of Europe. They've been fighting for this, and the people behind them have been fighting for this ever since the EU was created. So you have the European monetary system, the European Central Bank, without a political central authority. And now they're going to use the argument, look at what happened in Greece. It happened because we have an incomplete centralized system here. We have to have one central political authority, i.e. Reed dictatorship from Brussels, unelected. The European Parliament will play a rubber stamp role, as they always have. And you have the complete destruction of national sovereignty in any way, shape, or form.
Well, William, let's take a look at. Let's just take a look at this and put it in some perspective here.
Sure.
Because what I've got on the screen here is the answer to a question that many people have been asking, which is, how much does Greece actually owe? And the consistent figure seems to be around about 325 billion euros, which is about 407 billion US dollars. Mm-hmm. And and the graph I'm going to show next suggests that the debt is about 327 billion, but what's 4 billion amongst friends?
Right.
The reality is that much of that debt is owed around Europe. France obviously holding a big chunk of the debt here, which is why the French have such an interest. Yep. Germany, 6.32 billion, the UK 8.5, the US literally just barely 4 billion,
Yeah.
right down through Switzerland. But I just want to pick up on the point you just made as well about the banks, because bear this in mind. So the figure we need to remember here is 407 billion US dollars. So let's have a look at how much the banks were bailed out to. Mm-hmm. Top of the tree is Citigroup with 2.5 trillion. Now that's greater than
a private bank, a
private bank, exactly. And now that's greater than the GDP of well, it's pushing the GDP of the US.
Yeah.
And Morgan Stanley, 2 trillion. Merrill Lynch, just under 2 trillion. Bank of America, 1.34 million. Bear Stearns, 853 billion. And Goldman Sachs, 814 billion. Mm-hmm. And so these banks are bailed out, but of course they're bailed out, but the money that is used to bail them out, the nation states are effectively being charged interest on.
Sure.
And meanwhile, here's one that is a wonderful snapshot. Lloyd Blankfein, Chief Executive Officer of Goldman Sachs. So whilst the world has been going to hell in a handcart, and Goldman Sachs benefits to the tune of about $800 billion in bailout, this guy has earned in the period 2007 to 2014, actually, just short of $240 million.
$250 million. That's nice.
Nice work if you can get it, huh? And the European banks, I mean, this is also a bit of an absurdity, because you ran through, some of the banks there that have been bailed out, and here we go. Here's the numbers. Barclays, top of the list, $868 billion.
Right.
Royal Bank of Scotland, $541 billion. And Deutsche Bank took $354 billion. UBS, which of course is a Swiss bank, $287 billion. Credit Suisse, $262 billion. Bank of Scotland, $181 billion. Paribas, $175 billion. And another German bank, the Dresdner Bank, $135 billion. So when it comes to bailing the banks out, nobody turns a hair.
No. We need them. They perform an essential public service, driving us into debt slavery.
at a phenomenal rate of knots.
Yes.
Now, this is a strategy, isn't it? This is a strategy that has been well thought out.
It's a strategy that goes back several thousand years, actually. But the idea of taking a nation, and now what I call in my book the gods of money, they're no gods by any stretch of the imagination, but they think they are. They're trying to do it with the whole world. And I'm convinced at this point, from all the evidence I've seen, anecdotally and otherwise, that the gods of money, Wall Street and City of London, were literally so convinced of their own rubbish about credit default swaps, mortgage-backed securities, spreading risk throughout the world and so forth, that when the bubble burst on this fraudulent Ponzi scheme in March of 2007 in a small bank here in Germany, and then snowballed into this global crisis, they literally didn't imagine such a thing was possible. They thought they had constructed the perfect sorcerer's apprentice machine to make money infinitely and enslave the whole world in debt. So they had to kind of shift around and find out other ways of doing things. But in the meantime, a couple of upstarts that weren't even on the map 20 years ago started looking at this Western banking fiasco and the financial fiasco and saying, hey, how closely do we want to get locked into that? And one of them was the government in Beijing. I write about this in my book, Target China, in some detail. And the other was the government in Moscow, although then it was just the time that Medvedev and the Reset faction in the Russian elites had been brought into the presidency. So there was some testing of the waters of how serious Washington was with the Reset, and they found out Washington is selling them a pack of lies, and Hillary Clinton wanted nothing to do with any better relations with Russia, just to find out a way to put Russia through the ringer and steal what raw materials and assets they can. So this is an old story, and it's always played out in the same way. You get loose credit. People say, hey, now I can afford to buy that new Mercedes or that new house that we've been looking at in Spain or in Greece or whatever. This is no better time to do it. Let's jump in. And so they get up to their ears in debt, thinking interest rates are going to stay at 3% for eternity. Then something happens and interest rates go through the roof. There's a crisis in Greece. Your mortgage is unpayable. It's denominated maybe in pound sterling and not in euros. Who knows what? There are all sorts of variables. But then your property gets repossessed by these banks, like in America, like in the States, where many friends of mine who were paper millionaires 10 years ago today are on welfare, essentially on welfare. They've lost everything. The banks have repossessed their home that they built with their own hands, by the way. And that's happening all across the United States of America these last years. So who comes out the winner? You just showed it in these bailout charts. Look at the amount of money that the Obama administration, which has not changed a thing, by the way, the same banks control Barack Obama's presidency as controlled George W. Bush through Henry Paulson and the Wall Street Mafia. And what they do is create a kind of banker's dictatorship and build ever bigger bubbles so more and more people throw their lot in with it, and then pull the plug when they decide it's time to pull the plug.
Knowing full well that basically that they can simply just call upon a bailout, and as we'll talk about in a second, soon to be a bail-in. So the banks have total protection. I mean, they are totally above any national law, and it is simply asset stripping the planet.
Yeah, and to make sure they buy the politicians.
Of course.
Any European politician of the Greek political system. This is why I titled my article "Varoufakis Stinks." There's a sugar daddy oligarch, Greek oligarch or non-Greek oligarch. It's not so important. Behind Varoufakis, there's no doubt in my mind, and he is part of the problem. He's the Trojan horse who pretends to be a left liberal. Meanwhile, his advisor on the privatization or on the Greek crisis is none other than the investment bank, the British-French investment bank, Lazard Frères. So then this he didn't publicize so widely, and his academic career was spent mostly in Australia and in the United States.
Well, let's actually take a look at his academic career, because I mean this isn't insignificant, of course.
Yeah.
As you say, he is an Australian citizen, but he started his academic career in the UK at the University of Essex.
Yeah.
Where I think
his specialty is game theory.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, in fact, he evolved into game theory. So he did a BSc in physics at the University of Essex. Then he went on to do an MSc at the University of Birmingham in mathematical statistics. Mm-hmm. Whilst he did his PhD in economics back at the University of Essex again. Then he was a year as a fellow at Cambridge University. Mm-hmm. Before he went off to Sydney. Yeah. He was in where he was a senior lecturer in economics at Sydney University, and then he went back to Athens, where he was professor of economic theory at Athens University. But yes, then he went over to the US, where he was economist in residence at Valve Corporation. And
making video games
and perfecting his awareness of game theory. Mm-hmm. So clearly a student of John Nash, and I'm sure was embraced into some of the higher echelons in terms of economic game theory. Yes. So, as you rightly say, he really had the perfect training to be inserted into Syriza to bring about the total collapse of the country.
Well, keep in mind that the elements of Syriza, it's many different factions, old communists and Social Democrats, a whole potpourri of different factions. But they contain the element in Greece today that would make fundamental change against this debt slavery system that the Troika has imposed on Greece. They're the only party on the horizon. So if you can discredit that from within by making them, in the eyes of the Greek people and the world, utterly incompetent, which Varoufakis did a wonderful job. I have to give him credit. He did his job for these characters very, very faithfully.
Well, let's have a look at some of the things that he was doing. He's been doing over the last 6 months or so, because I mean he had at least one meeting, maybe more, with Putin's economic advisors,
yeah,
and was quite possibly, maybe even probably, given the opportunity to bring Greece into the BRICS community.
This is true. What happened, I was in St. Petersburg at the Economic Forum where Putin was in the plenary together with Tsipras. And what happened is that Putin offered, and Gazprom offered Greece a prepayment of, I think it was 5 billion euros, which is a good chunk of money when they're facing such a deadline crisis from the IMF, on Greece joining the Turkish Stream gas pipeline that would stop at the door of Greece on the Turkish side and bring the gas, into the European Union through Greece. And Tsipras was all smiles and very happy about that. He talked about a Greece Stream. Now we'll have a Greece Stream. Well, what that would do, Russia was not positioning Greece to get out of the euro or out of the EU at all. They were giving a lifeline so that they wouldn't have a default and wouldn't have to have a Greek exit. Well, then that would have bought them enough time so that Greece would become eligible as soon as it's up and running in some weeks for the BRICS infrastructure bank to get credits to build infrastructure for not only the pipeline, but to begin rebuilding a Greek economy that the Troika has literally destroyed. I mean, Wolfgang Schäuble, the German finance minister, should be brought before the Hague Tribunal for crimes against humanity, in my view, on the Greek question. He and his advisors have done such destructive things to human life in Greece.
But on the basis that, I mean, this is exactly what the German nation have had to endure, of course, over the last century. I mean, after the First World War, I mean, it's pretty much acknowledged that, a significant contributor to the rise of National Socialism in Germany was the Versailles Treaty, the terms of which were so punitive that Germany absolutely had no possibility of ever recovering from, and would be forced into horrendous austerity. Right. So then we have the rise of National Socialism. So, and by the way, also, Germany hasn't exactly been prompt in paying its debts. And in fact, I also recall that after the Second World War, Germany had a massive write-off of some of its debt.
Well, this is the point, Ian. There was a conference in London, the London conference after World War II, and Germany still had on its books payments of the Young Plan war reparations from the First World War, from the Versailles Agreements. And Hermann Ops, then the Speaker of Deutsche Bank, led the negotiations for the Adenauer government in London. And the United States and Britain and the other Allied victor countries gave Germany a write-off on a huge amount of that debt such that they could get back on their feet. And ironically, that is precisely the thing that Schäuble and the German government is refusing for Greece. They've put Greece into a depression with their austerity. The austerity is causing unemployment, it's causing budget deficits, it's causing a new banking crisis. The banks are insolvent now, the Greek banks. And that is all caused by the Troika, IMF. Well, look at the IMF. You showed the French banks as the biggest exposure initially to the Greek government debt. Who is the Director General of the IMF today, Christine Lagarde, a French political figure. So, and she's run the Greek business just as though it was in the interests of French banks only.
Oh, talking of Christine Lagarde, I got to show you this tweet that she put out today. The IMF has taken note of yesterday's referendum held in Greece. We are monitoring the situation closely and stand ready to assist Greece if requested to do so. God,
we'll be glad to give Greece the poison chalice.
Exactly. I mean, it's enough to make you want to gag.
Yeah. Well, keep in mind that some weeks ago, the same Christine Lagarde said we're stopping all money to Greece. They won't get a penny more because they're not negotiating in good faith. And that was Varoufakis, by the way. And at the same time, almost in the same breath, she said, well, if Ukraine defaults or not, we will continue to support Ukraine financially. Is that not a geopolitical agenda?
Of course. It's straight out of Brzezinski's grand chessboard.
Yes.
I know exactly what they're after.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we've got a situation here where Greece obviously has been, or the Greek government, Tsipras, has been given a mandate, and that mandate is basically not to continue down the path of extreme austerity. So, what are the options that are open to the Greek government now?
Well, unfortunately, when Syriza came in January, they did not have a plan B prepared. They should have, if they campaigned on a pledge to no more austerity, then they should be prepared to make the ultimate move, take Greece out of this horrendous thing called the euro, and impose currency controls back in January. Impose currency controls, nationalize the major banks. These are banks owned largely by shipping oligarchs, the Greek oligarchs, who, by the way, by law in Greece, the oligarchs, the shipping oligarchs, Latsis and other families, do not pay a penny of Greek taxes, neither personal, private taxes nor corporate taxes on their shipping revenues. And they're all registered in offshore tax havens where you can be sure they don't pay taxes either. So, and that accounts for a huge, that's the largest sector of the Greek economy.
Indeed.
In the last 20, 30 years. They are the world's leading shipping company, both for oil tankers and for commodity, dry goods and dry bulk cargoes. So nobody touches the taxation of the Greek oligarchs. Iceland has partly done a very beautiful thing. They started putting bankers on trial and some of them in jail, former prime ministers on trial, and some of them in jail for the criminal misdeeds of the financial bubble period. And they said, fig for the Spanish Armada to the British banks and the British government that they wanted to put Iceland into receivership to pay off these private banks' debts. They said these are private bank problems, not Icelandic government problems. And now they're deliberating over creating a public bank, a central bank that is not a central bank, a public bank that is a national bank. And every nation should have a national bank. The Federal Reserve, the plutocrats or the gods of money on Wall Street made a coup d'etat in December 1913. Woodrow Wilson was in on the coup, the former president of my alma mater, Princeton, and signed off the act, the Federal Reserve Act, giving control of the nation's money, power that's in the Constitution to print and create coin money, giving that power away to the private bankers' kleptocracy. And the history of America ever since then has been financing, through the Federal Reserve's activities, 2 world wars and the sole superpower hegemony, the greatest military waste of money budget on the planet.
But there is one state in the US, of course, that's outside of the Federal Reserve, and that's
North Dakota.
Exactly,
yeah.
North Dakota, the only state in the US that isn't bankrupt.
Well, they have a public bank.
Exactly.
This is interesting, Ian, if I can comment on this. My grandfather was came from North Dakota. He's Norwegian by stock. Well, he's long since deceased. But he was the statewide editor for something called the Nonpartisan League, one of the most blacked out chapters in American political history. The League was an alliance of mainly Scandinavian farmers and labor people. And they made an alliance against the Minneapolis banks that are screwing the farmers and robbing them blind, and the grain millers like General Mills and some of the same names that are still around today. And they got a governor elected, they got a senator in the U.S. Senate during the Depression, and Lemke, and they created the Public Bank of North Dakota. My grandfather was statewide editor of the Nonpartisan League press and was active in all of this even before World War I. So I have a very sensuous personal connection to.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, because of course the nickname of North Dakota is actually Norse Dakota, because it was ostensibly the Norse. They were the only ones who could thrive in that climate, because it's a pretty harsh climate up there.
It's a very harsh climate, yeah. I can tell you.
So yeah, but I think they've been out of the Federal Reserve since 1922. I mean, obviously, the Federal
also the Bank of North Dakota.
The Bank of North Dakota has been a separate entity. It's been a public bank since 1922.
Yeah.
And it's the model, of course, that Iceland have effectively embraced to get themselves out of the grip of the financial hegemonists. Yeah. So, in your opinion, obviously, we know that Greece should have been ready to do that. And maybe in their defense, one might argue that Syriza never expected to get anything like the almost majority that they got in January. But now, with the referendum...
Well, then they had no business running.
Well, there is that too. But I mean, now, obviously with the referendum, they've had ample time to prepare. So, what actually surprises me, perhaps, is that here we are, 24 hours or nearly 24 hours after the result was announced, and they haven't closed the financial borders, and they haven't effectively announced the readiness to reissue the drachma. Because surely this should be the way to go, to completely separate Greece now from the Troika and to re-establish its financial sovereignty.
No, they have no plan B. They've just named an Oxford-educated economist, an academic again, like Varoufakis, to become his replacement as economics minister, and someone who, like Varoufakis, has spent most of his career. He's born in Rotterdam, so he's technically a Dutch citizen, but he's Greek parentage. And he only recently came back to Greece for whatever reason, to teach, I don't know. So is he going to be the man with the cojones to, excuse my French, to do what's necessary for Greece and to end this charade of this debt-destructive slavery that the banks are imposing wherever they can get their claws in? I don't think so. I think the plan is Greece is going to go through bloody, bloody, bloody hell. The Greek people are going to suffer like no one can imagine. People are going to die. They're dying already. Hospital benefits, health benefits will be slashed brutally. And the government will just say, well, we tried. We have no power. It's this or there is no plan B. There is no plan B. Varoufakis made sure of that. That was his job. Go to the edge as a poser, posed to be a revolutionary or a radical. I was really optimistic when he came in. I said, here's an interesting economist. He's outside of the box, and maybe he's got enough gumption to do the right thing by Greece. No, he praised the European Central Bank at various times. He walked away from the Russian BRICS bank offer. He did all these things to make sure Greece. That's what leads me to the conclusion. He's the toy boy of the oligarchs, and that was his job, the Trojan horse.
So he has effectively committed high treason against the Greek nation. I mean, because he's effectively...
I think that should be brought before the appropriate legal body as a standing question, charged with high treason and demonstrate that that's the case.
Yeah, because he has it effectively, if unfortunately what you perceive to be is the case. I mean, he has effectively sold the nation to the global banksters. And of course, the reality is that whatever happens in Greece, the reality is that it's likely to befall Portugal, Spain, Ireland, Italy, and basically then the rest of the EU states, because that's their ultimate goal. And the reality is that there is, like you say, there is no plan B. So unless Greece does develop belatedly the appropriate cojones, then unfortunately the prognosis for the other countries in Europe is not good.
Including Germany, by the way.
Indeed.
Including Germany. It's, I think, the string pullers, or whatever you want to call these silly people, the oligarchs in the EU, their ultimate agenda is to put the European Union into a new dark ages like we had in the Middle Ages, where you have inquisitions that try people for truth crimes, that you have austerity unimaginable today, and there is it's 1984 on steroids, and that's their agenda. It's what they're doing in Ukraine. It's what they're doing now to Greece, and I, for one, think there's a better way to go. I'm advocating in my writings. Horace Greeley made this famous statement after the Civil War in the United States: "Go west, young man," and I say, "Go east, young man," because that's where the pot of gold is. Between Moscow, Vladivostok, Beijing, Shanghai, you have the greatest expanse of humanity. You have the greatest technological capabilities on the planet, including the United States. The military technology that Moscow rolled out in their 70th anniversary of the victory over the Third Reich, Hitler, last May 9, it was just awesome. It had jaws dropping in the West. The tanks, the fighter airplanes, and that's only part. They haven't unveiled everything. So this is not some little pipsqueak Iraqi defense force that the United States is playing with. They can't even build an F-35 all-purpose fighter jet. They're, what is it, $400 billion into cost overruns, and the doggone thing doesn't even fly.
Well, it gets taken down by an F-16, doesn't it? That's 40 years old. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I mean, if we look at the technology, the maglev railways that China is developing, whereas in Europe, we're getting wound up about a new high-speed rail line, which has got to be sort of 50 years behind where China's at in terms of its transportation network.
Well, what's interesting, if I can digress a little bit from Greece, Ian, in the last minutes, what's interesting is what the people in Washington and Wall Street and the people behind them, the David Rockefellers, if you will, to give them a name, or the George Soroses and their ilk, the American oligarchs, I call them. What they have ironically created is the worst nightmare imaginable. Brzezinski warned against it in his 1997 book, The Grand Chess Game, and that is a Eurasian cohesion between Russia, China, and Central Asian states that would develop the world's greatest economic potential ever. And I was reading yesterday, as I was finishing an article on another theme, the fact that Hungary has now joined the Silk Road Project, I was rereading Halford Mackinder's beautiful 1904 essay, the seminal essay of British geopolitics called The Geographical Pivot of History. In that essay, presented in 1904 to the Royal Geographical Society, Mackinder, who was a genius of an imperial bent, but no question that he had a genius, he described the fact that the Trans-Siberian Railway crossing and uniting Russia from the Pacific to Moscow, that's only one railway line now, and therefore it's vulnerable as a communication linking all of Russia, the vast expanse of Eurasia. However, within a few short years, there will be rail links crossing all of Eurasia and unifying that in a way that the Royal Navy cannot conquer it. Of course, British policy to rule the waves. Well, there were 2 world wars in between that prevented that from happening. And now what we have manifesting, because of the incompetence of the people in Washington, the incompetence of the people in NATO, the incompetence of the people in London and Whitehall and so forth, you're creating exactly that almost 110 years after the fact of Mackinder's initial essay, and it is putting the fear of God into these oligarchs in the West. They don't know what to do. The sanctions against Russia have backfired.
Yep.
They brought China and Russia closer together. China, I've been in Beijing 12 times in the last 8 years. I can tell you, the Chinese elites have no illusions about sweet words coming from Victoria Nuland or Hillary Clinton or Barack Obama. They know that their geopolitical opponent, as Putin now calls him, is the United States military, the Asia pivot. So it's creating one of the most beautiful things in my lifetime that I've ever witnessed, and that is the emergence or the birth of a new economy on this planet that has the potential to transform this messed up planet into something far more beautiful and positive.
Well, interestingly, of course, I think it was about 100 years ago that it was, excuse me, losing my earpiece here, but I think it was Rudolf Steiner who said that the fundamental change in the balance would come from the East. And I think, we're certainly starting to see that unfold. And as you, rightly say, the US desire to destroy the Iranian and Russian economies by forcing OPEC to drop the price of oil has backfired spectacularly. And of course, it's destroyed the unconventional gas industry in the US, which, in my opinion, is no bad thing. And of course, made it even more difficult for the unconventional gas industry to take a hold, elsewhere in the world. But it's something else, William, in the last few minutes. There's got to be a lot of effort going on to hold the price of gold down, because if we look at the price of gold, I would have expected to see a massive leap this morning. Yeah. But, somebody is clearly manipulating this, because, it's holding around 1170, which is, almost as low as it's been. If we look at, the 1 year, it's pretty much down. I mean, it's been down just below 1150, but, if we look at the 5 year, the 5 year flow, obviously since the high of 2000, late 2011, when it hit 1900. Yeah. And now we're still down at below 1200, despite the massive uncertainty here.
Yeah. Well, all I can say is the Bank of China is smiling all the way to the gold bank, because they buy cheap and build up their gold reserves for the renminbi. And now they've built a $16 billion gold mining fund, so that this Silk Road Railway has been brilliantly and deeply thought through. This is no fly by the night politician promise. It's the centerpiece of President Xi Jinping's presidency, is actualizing the Silk Economic Belt Road from across Eurasia. And parallel to that, it's going to link areas where there are known reserves of gold, but during the Soviet Union, where gold was not it was considered a capitalist relic under the Soviet economic period. And, they had gold and gold mines, but they never made it a priority. And then in the 70s, when the US dollar went off the gold exchange standard, and other countries too, gold kind of languished. Now, the Silk Railway, the Silk Road Railway lines are going to open up areas where there are known huge reserves of gold.
Absolutely.
And the currencies of the Eurasian Economic Union, Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and other countries that I think will join it fairly soon, and that of China, are going to be gold-backed. And guess which one most people are going to opt for in the next 2 or 3 years.
Absolutely. William, we're right out of time. This is a conversation that will definitely be continued. I just want to quickly draw people's attention to your website. This is your new website, www.williamengdahl.com.
Right.
where they can access your books and, of course, your articles. So, William, it's an absolute pleasure to hook up with you again. And thanks for joining me this evening. And like I said, I mean, this is certainly a conversation that we definitely need to continue. So,
Ian, it was a pleasure.
Thanks, William. Take care, my friend. Now, just before we play the final credits, tomorrow, of course, is the 10th anniversary of the London bombings, and how coincidental that we should be talking about Greece today when, of course, 10 years ago, it was a Greek driver of the bus that exploded in Tavistock Square. This is George Saradakis, whose movements in the immediate aftermath are still somewhat unexplained. And of course, not to forget the fact that on the outside of the bus was a hoarding for the film The Descent, and giving the finger to all those analysts who anticipated something of this ilk. Outright terror, bold and brilliant. And this is what Stagecoach are running around with now, Spirit of London, remembering 7/7. Well, I'm going to be doing that and a lot more tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. at St Saviour's Church in Pimlico. This is St George's Square, London, SW1V3QW, 7:30 p.m. I should be talking about the false flag agenda and a lot more beside. Entrance is by donation, so if you can make it along tomorrow night, Tuesday the 7th of July, the 10th anniversary of the London bombings, see you then. Thanks very much and good night.